Thanks so much, Liz. So yes, as Liz said, I'm the CEO, CTO at OpenCredo. So just a little bit about me, because it relates to the talk as well. So OpenCredo is a hands-on software development consultancy, and we help clients to sort of build distributed systems. And quite a lot of what we do more recently is also to help them build internal developer platforms. And what I want to do today is kind of give you some insights into what we've seen kind of works and doesn't work, because we've seen a lot of the trials and tribulations that people have gone through on this journey. And I'm hoping that you can gain some insight from that, especially if you're looking to start out on this journey yourself. But I want to start with an observation, and that is that what I find is that in the push to adopt some of these innovative new sort of technologies, people have lost sight of the human innovators and the communities behind it. And I think in a large part for the platforms that maybe don't work out so well, this is because people get quite sort of fixated on the cool new innovative technologies, but they lose track of the people behind it. So when I'm talking about a platform, though, what I'm talking about here is an internal developer platform. So we had some talks yesterday about exactly what that means, but just to give you a brief sort of overview, an internal developer platform is something that's built internally for your teams that are building the software to actually go out to your end users. And the goal is really to empower them, to make it easier for them to deploy and develop, and basically make the development sort of life cycle easier. But when I'm working with a lot of different sort of clients, quite often I hear them talk about Kubernetes, and they say, oh, Kubernetes is the platform. And whilst Kubernetes is a fantastic and a very key part and part of the sort of open source ecosystem that is used to build a lot of these platforms, it's often sort of, as I say, used interchangeably with a platform, and that can be somewhat problematic. Because what I really want to try and get across as part of this talk as well is that if you want to build a great platform, it's going to be more than just Kubernetes and just the open source sort of ecosystem that goes with it, although that is really, really important and it's a key part of making this work. So you'll say, all right, well, if it's more than that, what exactly is involved? So you say, well, we're in IT, we know how this works. We just need a simple Venn diagram. You're going to build a platform, it's got to target some people, we need enough process to make sure that everything kind of works. So we just kind of find the intersection and kind of magically we have this awesome sort of super platform. Of course, the reality is that, or the problem is that it's not really quite that simple. And whilst it's important to bring these aspects together, if you just do it in a naive fashion, that also doesn't really work. And some of the reasons for that is, there's a few that we'll kind of go through. So the first one that I'd say is that your audience, when you're building these internal developer platforms, is going to be far more diverse than you may realize. So you're going to have different communities, they're going to have different skills, they're going to have different sort of levels, and all of this needs to be taken into account. So if we look at who builds these platforms in the first place, it's often built by your platform or your infrastructure engineers. These are people who are going to have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge about provisioning, infrastructure as code, and all of those key things that you need to do that. But a common mistake that we see sort of organizations making when they go on this journey is that they expect that the people they're building for also understand some of these low-level constructs. And when they land up building the platform, they create abstractions that are quite low-level. So they might say, well, here's a YAML file, you just go and put your variables in here and off you go and all is well. But the thing is, there's a lot more communities that need to be taken into account as opposed to just the people who really understand this stuff and build a platform. So the first community, which is the primary target audience for internal developer platforms, is your developers. So they're going to be the main people. However, they're not the only ones. You've also got maybe a subset or a different set of people like your data scientists, your machine learning engineers, and they have a different set of requirements that they need from the platform. So they have to worry about things like ML ops, data lineage, And even the way that they work is different. They work in a more sort of experimental nature, and they might need different hardware and stuff. So the type of sort of features that they will need from the platform is going to be quite different from those of sort of standard developers. You've also got what I would call the sort of often forgotten community of leadership and governance. So these are your regulatory and your sort of finance folk. And whilst they're not going to use the platform in exactly the same way as the developers, they're not going to be spinning, sort of things up and down. They do need to understand, are they getting a return on investment? So they've put a lot of money into this, behind this sort of venture, and they say, well, am I able to go faster? Am I able to scale up my organization by using this platform? And they will need to sort of interact with things like reports and stuff, as opposed to maybe spinning machines and things up. But I would say the single biggest misconception that I see out there is that there's a belief that you can solve this problem with technology alone. Like I say, open source is a key part, and Kubernetes is a key part of this, but it's generally not enough. Now, whilst it's really important to be able to technically be able to do the things that you need to build a good platform, so things like automation, making sure that you have your abstractions at the right level, what we've seen is that, like I say, many clients, some of our clients have sort of gone and they've built a platform and they've built it, and technically it might actually be quite good. But actually, they kind of hope that the teams are just going to use it, and they just don't seem to. And the reason for this is, I would say, there's an old sort of film, which will date me a little bit, which is Kevin Costner's Field of Dreams. And there's this kind of belief that, if you build it, they will come. You just got to build a platform, and magically the teams are just going to come, and they're going to be able to use it. And this really doesn't work, and often it's just a white elephant. And this because the problem is that you need more than technology to make this work. You've got to be really sort of purposeful about sort of driving the higher engagement and kind of pulling your communities to the left. So how do you go about doing this? Well, this generally requires a thinking and a rethink in terms of the way you kind of structure your teams and how they actually interact with each other. Because different teams, different communities are going to be at different levels, and you need to adapt your teams and your structures to make that work. So you're going to have basically different communities, different teams to make them work. But the third and sort of final thing in this area that is challenging for when you're trying to put these together is that I think there's also this hope that change is constant, especially when it comes to governance and the like, and these sort of processes, and that once you've built this platform, you can put your governance and your process in place, and it's just kind of static and it's not really going to change. But again, as I said before, things are changing all the time, and it's not just the requirements that change. So you might kind of find that, yes, I need to spin up a new type of database or need a new type of sort of technical thing done. But the teams themselves are changing all the time. So you've got different sort of skills, you've got different requirements and experience that are coming in and out of the teams as you move along. And so the governance and the processes that you're going to sort of impose on the teams can't be a one-size-fits-all. You need to take into account that you've got these different levels and kind of adapt for that. So one example I sometimes give is you may be in an organization where maybe you're going for a while, and you've got some teams that they've got really good at this, and they've learned how to use the platform. They know what's going on with cloud native, etc. And then you've got a new team that comes in. Maybe they come from a legacy perspective. They haven't done this before, but they're also trying to get onboarded and get going, and the platform is there to help them. Now, you can't have exactly the same governance and process for each of them, because you've got to allow for the fact that some are going to need more freedom to do things and innovate, and others will need a bit more guidance. But my key point that I really want to make here is that, if you want to build a really great sort of platform engineering experience, it's going to require you to have a look at this as sort of holistic socio-technical challenge. So that's a big word, but essentially all I really mean is that you need to be able to look at the technical side of things as well as the social side of things and see them as interrelated and bring those together when you're trying to solve for this. So, sort of spoken a bit about the platform and the fact that we're looking to sort of build this platform. But a lot of what we're doing, what I've spoken about, as you can sort of hear, is actually about the experience behind it as well. And that is what platform engineering is really about. It's not just about the technical part of building the platform. It's all the bits and pieces that go around it to make the experience of the end users successful. There's a variety of different sort of definitions. This is mine that I've got there at the moment. And then I would define platform engineering as a discipline which involves doing whatever it takes, and that will be technical, social, team structures, to be able to make a good curated platform experience for all of the different communities that are actually using it. So you say, great, okay, this is all fair and well, but how do we get there? How do we platform engineer well? So I want to start off by having a look at what we see as some of the successful characteristics of organizations that have done this well, and then step back and say, all right, let's have a look at what some of the principles are that sit behind that can maybe drive us towards that. But before I do that, a bit of a prerequisite is that in terms of being successful, I really do think you need to make sure that you have got good executive C-level buy-in if you're starting on these initiatives, and also some good technical expertise to make sure you don't go down rabbit holes and things like that. So the executive buy-in is quite important because, first of all, you need to have, the funding and stuff behind it. But crucially, this is going to require you to change potentially team structures and invest in certain areas. And if you don't have that backing, you often end up getting stalled. So initiatives that are purely from the grassroots, they get so far and then they get stuck. So having executive buy-in is really, really important. So, assuming we've got all our prerequisites out of the way, what are some of the characteristics of a successful platform experience that we've seen? So the first one is that a good experience will really have one where there are clear boundaries and responsibilities established. In other words, it's really clear what is the responsibility of the platform and what is the responsibility of the teams who are actually kind of using it. And this is important because the teams themselves need to understand, what do I need to do to be a good citizen on this platform? Now, if you don't have these clear sort of boundaries and responsibilities, you just land up in a little bit of a blame game. So the way we've seen this sort of play out before is you have a development team and they're using the platform, they're building their system, and something goes wrong and they're like, it's the platform's fault because it's running on the platform, so they raise their ticket, and the platform says, no, you haven't had a look at the logs, go and look at the logs first, and then you can come back and we'll have a discussion. And you just kind of land up in this ping pong, because it's really not clear what the boundaries are. So a good platform will make it very clear where these boundaries are and who's responsible for what. Secondly, and this I would say is the most sort of sought after characteristic by users of the platform, is that they want it to be self-service. Now this can be through a combination of effective documentation, tools, and tech as well, but ideally they want it to be also as automated as possible. So automation gives you the reliability, it gives you the repeatability, but crucially the self-service part and the automation together will basically create or give teams the ability to go as fast or as slow as they need to go. So they get the independence to be able to work, not relying on the platform team per se to do things, but they can self-serve and that they can make progress in and of themselves, do the innovation that they need in order to get their actual programs and software out. Thirdly, really good platforms are flexible and evolvable. And this is both in the technology space as well as in the process space. So a platform obviously needs to be opinionated enough to make sure that there's order. But it also needs to cater for the different communities, the different requirements. And this will also mean deviating from the standard sort of model sometimes, because sometimes that's required in order to make progress. So this means that you can't, as I said before, with the process side of things, but also sometimes in the tech, you can't have a one-size-fits-all for everybody on the platform. And finally, really good platforms are reliable. So it doesn't matter how much you manage to woo your teams or whatever, if you make a platform available for your teams to use, and they're going to deploy their stuff into production, if it's flaky or it hasn't been tested properly, it doesn't work, they will lose confidence in your platform, so will management, and again, it will fall flat. And we've seen this happen a number of times. So people try to sometimes rush the sort of development of the platform out. It's not tested properly, and then people just don't actually use it. So these are the successful sort of characteristics that you would find. So what I want to do now, though, is instead of me kind of telling you these are the do's and don'ts, this is exactly how you should do this, a good way that we found of sort of getting different companies in different stages to sort of move forward is to follow what I would call 4 community-driven principles. Now, these principles, you may implement them differently. I'll give you some examples of some of the stuff that we've seen work. But I would argue that if you follow the principles, they should still get you to the same sort of outcome. So the first principle is to make teams independent of and not dependent on you. So obviously, your teams are going to be dependent on you to a certain extent because, they're going to be using your platform. But what you don't want is for them to sort of personally rely on you or your teams to be able to actually do things for them. We're aiming for empowerment here. So what I've got here actually is the sort of characteristics at the top, and then some of the examples of things that you can do to achieve some of those characteristics going down with little X's. So the first thing that is really a good first step is to define what I would call a platform contract. So this doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be like a document somewhere. But it works a little bit like the AWS shared responsibility model. So this is where it makes clear this is the responsibility of the platform, this is the responsibility of the teams that are using it. And a good example for something here is maybe sort of in the sort of security and the compliance space. So you might say, all right, if we're a Kubernetes shop, the platform team are going to be responsible for the Kubernetes cluster itself and the security of that and the way that it interacts with each other. But actually, it's going to be the responsibility of the teams to make sure that their images and their containers are scanned and that they don't have vulnerabilities in it. So you as a platform might actually say, well, we're going to provide you the tools to be able to do that. So we'll give you the scanning functionality and the ability to sort of plug it in, but it's your responsibility to do it. Now, that's in one scenario. You may have a different scenario where a different company or a different organization will say, well, actually, we're a little bit more opinionated on this, and we've got quite a strict sort of pipeline. We've got a stage where we're doing the scanning, and we are going to scan your container. If it doesn't get past that point, you're not going into production. Both are valid, both are different, but the key thing is to make it clear somewhere as to who is doing what and where the responsibility lies. So the other key thing here is to favor automation and API-driven sort of tools over human ones. So Abby spoke about this yesterday, which is great. It fits quite well into this because this is really what will empower you to make teams independent of you. So areas where we found this really sort of helpful is on things like onboarding, infrastructure provisioning. So maybe it's about sort of, what you really don't want is for teams to kind of start and it takes them like a few days or a week to actually get onto the platform. You want to get them going quickly. So if it's just a case of getting a slice of your Kubernetes cluster, maybe it's a namespace with a setup going, or else it's maybe getting an entire cluster yourself. These are the type of things that you can automate and you can make it easy for people to get going. Now, depending on the level of trust in the organization, you may do things slightly differently. You might say, okay, well, we're going to give the freedom to do sort of infrastructure as code, but you have to do Terraform. That's the sort of constraint. but often there's going to be a lot more, people will be a bit more sort of prescriptive about what they allow and what they don't allow. So there's a variety of things here that you can sort of do here. Besides, for example, using Terraform modules, one of the other things that we've seen as becoming definitely more popular is for people to use things like Kubernetes operators. And this is also using something like Crossplane, if you've come across that before. So again, there's quite different levels of automation, but and the amount of flexibility in it, but something like Crossplane provides a great way to be able for you to define the API. This is what I want my people to be able to do when they're on board. Just put the things in there, and behind the scenes it will go and automate all of the creation for you. The other thing that's important here is documentation. And this is not just restricted to sort of textual documentation on Wiki. I'm also referring here to things like creating templates and reference implementations for teams. So as I said before, what you're really trying to do is you want to try and pull your teams closer to the platform. You want to try and get them to engage with the platform, and a good way of doing that is to provide, obviously, the documentation to make them independent of you, but also give them, sort of the reference implementations that they need to get going. So, yes. The second principle is really to promote freedom within boundaries over just allowing anything to go. So this, again, is important because you want to provide the ability to sort of adapt and innovate as needed, but you also don't want this to be a free-for-all. You need all the communities that are going to be part of the platform to be able to use it. So some of the key things that you can do here is, in the first instance, just to establish some of the ground rules. So this is something that you could do in the sort of platform contract where you define, you say, look, we are an Amazon shop, and so all of our choices that we're going to make are going to be made in the context of being an Amazon shop. Or you might say, actually, we are a multi-cloud setup, so the choices that we make sort of going forward need to take into account, you need to be able to go to multiple clouds, and or we're hybrid or on-prem or whatever. But setting these kind of ground rules up, again, establishes what kind of choices can be made going forward. And this is really the main thing that is actually quite freeing in a way, rather than restricting, is to provide people with choice. So the area where, some of the areas where we've seen this work well is, for example, around tech stacks. So you might say, all right, if you're a developer, you can use a Java Spring Boot or a Node, Go Node.js sort of stack, or whatever combination you is, but you can't just choose anything. So, and by doing that, you give people you give the freedom to choose amongst a decent amount of sort of choice, but it's also not a free-for-all, which can cause a real sort of challenges later. But you don't just leave them there. You don't just say, all right, well, those are your choices, go off and kind of do it. You want to bring them closer. You want to get them to embrace your platform more. So this is where you need to provide them with things like templates and reference implementations. What does good look like? How do I do this well on the platform, get them going sort of really quickly? So there's also, sometimes people will make choices within ecosystems. So from the provisioning perspective, people might say, okay, for an Amazon shop, we're just going to use CloudFormation, or they might say, actually, we're a Terraform shop. So as long as you use Terraform, that's okay. That's also part of the type of choices and the different types of options that people can make here. Thirdly, you need to be a role model and walk the talk. So, what do I mean by that? So, here it's really key to practice what you preach. And this includes being able to sort of impose on yourself the restrictions that you put on other people. So, eating your own dog food, so to speak. So, if you're going to be providing people with tooling to be able to sort of spin up infrastructure, the quickest way to make sure that it works is to make yourself use that same tool. So as soon as you do that, you will find that problems get fixed really quickly. So making sure that you can also take advantage of, that you can use that is a surefire way to make sure that you get reliability and resilience built into what you do. Sometimes this is not possible, however. So sometimes, you can't do that. And in that case, some of the things that we've seen work quite well is for teams to provide, again, reference implementations. So here is an example of how you would do the provisioning, but not just a reference implementation. You actually then use that as an exemplar tenant, maybe on the platform, and you run your acceptance tests and some of the tests against that. So you've got something that is live and still being able to sort of be verified, even though you're not maybe using it yourself. So the other thing which is really, really important here is to recognize that when you are a platform team and you're offering this sort of experience, is that you are the professional services for your organization. So you can't sort of think, but well, if you were to take sort of Amazon, for example, you can't just call in Amazon Professional Services and say, well, can you explain how we do this on the platform? Because it's your platform, it's unique to you. And this can work in different ways, and we've seen this working with sort of platform teams having workshops with people, embedding some of their people into some of the development teams. But it's key to recognize that this is part and parcel of what needs to be done to have a good platform experience. And when this happens, irrespective of whether time is catered for it or not. So one of the key things is for leadership as well to recognize that this is a function of a platform engineering initiative. And if it's not, all that happens is that your platform teams land up getting frustrated because they have to do this in any case. The teams need to understand and need people working with them to help them actually onboard and just basically get up to speed with how the platform works. So a key message for leadership is that this needs to be built into the thinking of the teams, the way they're structured, and the stuff that needs to be done. So this may mean that you need some sort of platform evangelists or advocates, and this is not to promote the latest sort of platform snake oil, but as I said before, it's really just to try and make sure that you can demonstrate what are the right ways to use the platform and to get the best out of it. If you're a small setup, so you're only just sort of starting out, we see that your principal engineers sometimes double up in this capacity, so they kind of land up doing that. But as you get as you get bigger, it may be that you actually employ specific people to do DevX or this type of stuff for you. And fourthly and finally is the fourth principle, which is to respect and recognize that there are these differences and how do you cater for them. So, as I said, your teams are going to have different sets of experience, they're going to have different levels, and adapting them to work differently depending on where you are in your journey is a key part of making the platform experience actually work. And there's a variety of different ways that this can be done, but one of the really, really great book, and I highly recommend this if you have not come across this, is the Team Topologies book by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace. And they go through, they describe different sort of team structures that you can have in an organization, the different ways that these teams can interact with each other, depending on what you're trying to achieve and trying to reduce the cognitive load and get fast flow moving through the organization. And this is crucial when it comes to platform engineering because your teams are going to change, they're going to morph, you're going to have to evolve as you kind of go along. And this provides a really great framework for looking at how you can go about doing that. So adapting the teams, adapting your structures is something that is really kind of key here. And this is why I say you need that C-level buy-in. Because if you don't have that and you sort of say, you know what, we need to change the way our teams work, and you don't have the authority to be able to sort of make that, to actually make that happen, things just tend to fall apart. So in terms of what we've seen in some of the organizations that we've worked with, so there is a concept of a platform team. So, and we've seen that work in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's one team, sometimes it's broken up into multiple teams. But working in collaboration with the sort of stream-aligned teams, enabling them to be able to really achieve what they need to do is some of the patterns that we've seen work really well. So if I just recap, and it's on one slide, so you can get all the community-driven principles there. The principle we've spoken about is to make teams independent and not dependent on you. And there's some examples of some of the things that you can do to make that happen. Promoting freedom over anything goes is really important. It is quite freeing and not restrictive when it's done well. Being a role model, walking the talk, and respecting and recognize community differences are the key principles that we see as being able to drive through to some of these successful characteristics. So as you've heard, in terms of building a platform, even building an open source platform for an organization, it's not just about the what you build and how that works. It's also about how you interact with people. So we need to be open, not just in terms of open source, we need to be open in the way that we interact with people, open in terms of the teams and the ideas around changing that to be successful. So I would say that we should aim not just to provide a service, but we should also aim to be a service as part of a platform engineering initiative. So, in summary, you want to build a great platform. Start with some good foundations. So make sure you've got your C-level buy-in, you've got good technical expertise to make sure you don't go down rabbit holes. If you're guided by the community sort of principles that we've spoken about, and you use that to try and aim for creating the successful characteristics that we've seen in many of the clients at work, then I would say, as with other clients, you should hopefully get to a point where you can really create a curated platform that is a fit-for-purpose platform for the different communities, and one that is built for the people, by the people, and of the people. So, and with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicki. Do we have any questions? Yes, I see a question there.
So you talked about you have these different stakeholders and these different audiences, but I'm not fully understanding. You talk about boundaries and you talk about having contracts. How do you adapt that to different teams and make that scalable? Do you have different contracts with different teams, and does that cause friction within a company? Well, they get to do that and we don't, things like that.
So I think it depends. On the sort of organization that you're in. But so, for example, with teams that are maybe not as experienced and teams that are, you might say there might be different options. So different options to be able to have the freedom to spin up, for example, a cluster. So in the beginning, you may say, well, you can't choose the sizing and stuff like this. You're kind of restricted to just having the default sort of set of things. But as you learn more about it, if you're really sure you need the special bells and whistles, more of those sort of opportunities or more of those features might get enabled. But you kind of got to prove yourself first and just make sure that you first understand, what's sort of going on. In terms of the sort of clear lines of boundaries and the clear sort of responsibility, sometimes that's, as I say, it's more about, it's about the general platform and the team itself. And where there are sort of differences in, well, this team can do this and this can't do that, you'd need to put that somewhere. So documenting that, whether it's in the contract or whether it's maybe a slightly different area, you still want to make that clear. So, but the key thing for the responsibility and the line drawing is, what does the platform do? What are the teams responsible for? Because when there's a blurring of those lines, then it's really challenging.
I see one other question over that side, actually. We'll just take this last one in the interest of time.
Hi, so you mentioned C-suite buy-in or exec buy-in. I'm quite lucky I've seen both sides of the equation, one where they're in this very traditional mindset of an old-style infrastructure ops area, and another one where they get it. But if you've got execs that are in that old mindset, what tactics are there to bring them on that journey and get that buy-in? So
it's a good question. And this is where, as I say, having a combination of exec buy-in as well as technical expertise to take you safely as required, and that includes at that sort of level. So sometimes you will encounter people that want to do this theoretically, so they're like, I want the benefits of platform engineering, but I still want to stick to my to the way I kind of do things, and that involves, and that's that's a process of kind of working with them and say, well, actually this works differently, and if you want to do this, you're going to have to change the way you think, and are you prepared to do that? And sometimes people aren't, and then it just it's like it doesn't work in that case. So there is an education process and kind of working with execs as well to just explain. You don't get this for free. These are the things that you're going to have to look at, that you need to consider sort of changing, and are you prepared to do that? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes it's no.
So have you seen things like, I don't know, skunkworks teams work effectively in that sort of idea, or does it genuinely require execs to sort of change their thinking?
I mean, I think you can certainly make progress, but sometimes it looks like people get to a certain level, so you can make good progress and but then sometimes you kind of hit that barrier, and in order to get past, like I say, to get a really good platform, you need that buy-in, because otherwise you'll hit this barrier where you definitely improve things and you make things better, but you just can't get beyond that, and that's where, unless you have exec buy-in, it doesn't work.
Thank you so much, Nicki. Let's have a round of applause for Nicki.
Thank you.